Poor children are often defined exclusively by money, whereas poverty is about access or lack of to 9 other resources, including support systems, language, relationships, and role models. In 2006, Case stated that education is seen as the route to solving child poverty. Improving attainment and attendance in schools for pupils from poor families is expected to enhance life choices. Throughout this documentary, we'll be exploring how factors both in and outside of schools can affect the education of children from deprived backgrounds. The culture of poverty thesis was developed by Oscar Lewis in the 1950s. He argues that those who grow up in poverty adopt the values, habits, and ideas that in turn perpetuate more poverty, causing little socio-economic growth. A study completed by Tran, Luchters, and Fisher in 2016 showed that globally, poorer children do not achieve as highly as their well-off counterparts, as there are more barriers in their way. Payne further develops the culture of poverty thesis, but instead states that teachers should teach the values of the middle class, therefore the working class children gain the cultural capital they once lacked. In 2008, Feinstein found that parental education and involvement is the most important factor affecting their child's achievement. It has been shown that parents of a higher socio-economic background are more able to support their children through tutoring, after-school activities. They're also more likely to be more ambitious for their children, encouraging their child further academically. However, in her 2017 article, Ladson Billings states that from her experience teaching in deprived areas, she found that the parents viewed education as the way to escape poverty. This shows that whilst parents of a low socio-economic background are interested in education, schools must then focus on making it more accessible for them. This can be done through presentation afternoons when children can show the parents the work they have done at school.
Bernstein developed a theory in 1960 about the relations between societal class and language development. From using speech samples, he was able to examine the responses of middle-class and working-class children with a variety of IQ levels, finding that the working class were responding with words from a lower level of linguistic hierarchy, whereas the middle class were using a higher level. From this theory, many more have been developed, each of them showing proof that the difference in a child's socio-economic background reflects strongly on their language development. Children acquire strong vocabulary skills through frequent high-quality conversations, and so those children who come from a working class or deprived family often tend to be at more of a disadvantage, portraying the reason in which children who come from lower levels of socio-economic background tend to be associated with having social problems such as linguistic, cognitive and socio-emotional. An example of this is Hart and Risley's research in 1995, who found that the average 4-year-old from a professional household has heard roughly 4.5 million words, whilst the average 4-year-old from a welfare household has heard roughly around 13 million. Montano-Harmon continued this research in 1991 and found that the issue for many children is that they know only casual register rather than both casual and formal. This, however, has been argued by Hallberg in 2010, who believes that irregardless of your socio-economic background, when starting school, all opportunities should be equal and achieved by forgetting what children may or may not already know and developing them as a whole. This, for example, should be encouraged from early years, and teachers could effectively put this into order by using a slow pace and open-ended questions for children to express thought and become engaged. In order for schools to be more successful when teaching language to a classroom that come from a mixed socio-economic background, they should introduce the idea of drawing meaning to the vocabulary being used. For example, this is an opportunity to teach formal register to all by encouraging them to find other, more sophisticated ways to phrase a statement. Pupil premium was introduced in 2011 and is a sum of money given to individual schools by the government to help improve the attainment of disadvantaged pupils, those who have been looked after by a local authority for more than 6 months, or those whose parents have or do serve in the armed forces. Pupil premium is based on research that children from low-income families tend to perform less well, and this is due to the fact that they often face challenges such as poor language and communication, lack of confidence, and issues with attendance and punctuality. This is therefore in place to help narrow the gap between disadvantaged children and their peers. Pupil premium is used in a tiered approach, and this tier has 3 strands: the improvement of teaching, targeting academic support, and wider strategies. For teachers to be able to help support all children, Schools must allow them access to a wide variety of resources, professional development opportunities, and extra support for teachers who are early on in their career. In order to further academic support, there should be access to structured interventions, small group tuitions, and one-to-one support for those children who would benefit. Finally, wider strategies are put into place to better the general well-being of those children entitled to pupil premium, as this allows them to achieve better academically. Schools often tend to do this through introducing child-specific behavioural approaches, breakfast clubs, and free school meals. There are, however, many factors that show that pupil premium may not be entirely effective. The National Audit Office released a report in 2015 stating that whilst the attainment gap has slowly narrowed, the gap continues to remain wide. 77% of schools use at least some of their money to fund activities for all students, and a wide variety of schools are using their money to fund strategies that are not endorsed by the Education Endowment Foundation. This therefore shows that whilst pupil premium is extremely helpful for those pupils who are at a disadvantage, schools should be using their funds to benefit their students better.
Compensatory education refers to the idea that schools should put provisions in place to support children from disadvantaged backgrounds in order to close the educational achievement gap. Compensatory education was introduced in the late 1960s, with new schemes and policies put into place under the Labour government between 1997 and 2010. One initiative that was set up is Sure Start, a programme which is targeted at parents of children under the age of 4, which consisted of family centres which were set up across the country in disadvantaged areas. Sure Start provides services including drop-in health visitors, preschool play sessions and support for speech and language, amongst many other services. Whilst this is beneficial in disadvantaged areas, families who are seriously disadvantaged could be excluded if the area they live in isn't disadvantaged overall. Schools may also offer compensatory education in the form of help for parents. Schools may also provide breakfast clubs which are low cost. This ensures that children have breakfast each morning before beginning school. When schools implement the use of compensatory education in an effective manner, the attainment of children from deprived backgrounds can be improved.
An opposing approach is non-excuses education. A school who adopts this approach doesn't allow a child's background to influence their learning. The Michaela School in North London was given the title the strictest school in Britain by The Guardian in 2016 due to its strict teaching practices. The school first hit headlines in 2016 when it was discovered that parents who couldn't afford to give their children money for school dinners forced their children to be sat in separate rooms to their peers. Therefore, this is an example of a school segregating its pupils purely down to financial need. Becker pioneered the theory of labelling, which can result in a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is when an expectation placed on an individual will come true simply because they believe it to be true. Becker explained that people aren't born with certain innate behaviours, in this case behaviours such as laziness and disinterest in education. Instead, these behaviours develop due to labels that have been contrived by society based on stereotypes. For example, if a child from a poor family is labelled as slow, lazy, or unintelligent based upon assumptions due to their background, then it's highly likely they will live up to these expectations and consequently remain in a lower class. However, Fuller's study in 1984 showed that girls resented the labels they received due to being black and female, as they believed their teachers expected them to fail. Therefore, they worked to disprove these labels. Only 4 years previously, in 1980, Bird explained that some labels are more likely to stick than others. He found that children were more likely to accept academic labels compared to cultural or behavioural ones. When children have constant exposure to labels, it is very likely that they will begin to believe them and conform to these labels, which will inevitably result in them fulfilling the assumptions placed upon them. For example, if a child is born into the bottom 20% of wealth, then they only have an 8% chance of moving up the socio-economic ladder into the top 20%. Of course, this is due to a number of factors. However, Becker's labelling theory does play a role here. A reason for this is explained by Thomas when he states that children from lower class families are significantly lower in their vocabulary, knowledge of numbers, concentration skills, and their ability to share with other children. Janis et al. Furthers this point when he shows us that schools with a large population of low-achieving pupils as a demographic of low-income families. Overall, it is clear that although factors such as their socio-economic background have a massive impact on a child's educational attainment, there are many policies and provisions that can be used within schools to better these children's chances, such as pupil premium funding being used effectively, building positive relationships between teachers and pupils, and creating a community within the school which allows children's parents to be involved in their learning in a number of different ways.